So thanks everyone for joining today. We are going to be talking all things training for ice climbing, both mental and physical, with Coach Patrick Cooke. I'm just going to start with some logistical things, quick intros, and then um, we'll jump into sort of the meat and potatoes of it. Um, just so for context, we're going to start with 10 to 15 minutes of sort of like a guided discussion with Patrick, just to lay some groundworks for how to think about training, how to think about your season and your plan systematically. After that, it'll be an open Q&A and really hoping it'll be conversational. There's no wrong questions. We're all here to learn, ask away. So that's the general framework. I'll do a quick intro of myself and Patrick. I'm Aaron. I'm the host of Ice Beta. I've been rock climbing about 6 years. Ice, this will be my third season. I started dry tooling last year. It's super fun. It's my favorite discipline by far. It's like super bouldering because you have like huge reaches, huge dynamic moves, but you can also be really ticky-tacky. That very quick oscillation between those two like very stark styles is really cool. I'm going to do a quick intro for you, Patrick. Okay. Patrick's been climbing for nearly 20 years, rock and ice. Good. He's ticked hard classics all over New England, the Canadian Rockies, Quebec, Scotland, and Highlight. Good. Just going to keep looking at you. Patrick is especially drawn to thin technical routes. He enjoys scratching up weird mixed lines and has begun to embrace more sport style mixed climbing. After 12 years of teaching high school history, he began working in the climbing industry in the past few years as a coach, both for Project Direct Coaching and for Central Rock Gym in Stoneham, not Stoneham, for people not from New England. He's excited to be coaching because it combines two passions of his, climbing and teaching. And in sharing in the sport with other like-minded individuals, it helps him to stay grounded and keeps the fire burning to get out. And get out he does, which he might talk about some of the big send last year. But I'll let Patrick talk about Project Direct, which is what he's here with.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So, my full-time job is with Central Rock Gym in Stoneham, but the last year and a half or so, I've been working with Carly over at Project Direct Coaching, and really kind of came on board as their specialists in winter climbing, ice and mixed climbing. Project Direct, we work with athletes all over the world in mostly one-on-one settings. We do offer some like kind of periodically like class type settings with larger groups, but our bread and butter is really working one-on-one with athletes. And this can take the form of working one-on-one in the sense of like forming a training plan and helping people through that training plan. So it's not just the creation of the plan, but it's the plan adherence, plan monitoring, and support with that to react to whatever's going on in one's life. It's not just here's 12 weeks of what to do, go do it, but rather it's a relationship between a coach and an athlete. We also specialize in mental training, headspace training, especially for red point climbing. And I've started working with people on mental training specific for ice climbing, again, based on each individual client's needs. And then we do what's kind of what we call one-on-one training, which is the combination of all the above. We in addition to the training plans, we try to include and emphasize movement analysis and work as well. So that's a big difference between just working with a trainer but versus working with a coach, is we want to give you the exercises to do, but we also want to see the way you move on the wall, whether that's rock, ice, etc., so that we can not just work on the physical tools in terms of strength, power, and endurance, but how you actually use those tools. And that's one of the things that I think really sets apart working with a coach, and especially working with Project Direct, from other training outlets that are out there right now.
And when working with clients, as you've told me in the past, it all starts with the assessment. So this is us kicking off the guided discussion. So why don't you take it from there, Pat?
Yeah. And so I think that, right, in order to understand what to do in terms of training, and I think this is true for any endeavor that you're involved with, whether it's a physical endeavor, it's an intellectual endeavor, you need to have an assessment of what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And so, really, when I work with clients, it's important for me to have a baseline, right? That we're doing tests to see like you know, what are the different strengths that we have, what metrics are going to be things we want to focus on, and working from that so that we have a means of measuring our success. And also, for me as a coach, I have a means of targeting the things that are going to have the biggest impact for you as an athlete. And so part of that is literally, things like how hold you can, how long you can hold on to a certain edge, how much weight can you pull, how much weight can you press, push, etc. And then taking that and looking at what are your goals, what are your experiences, and crafting a plan from it so that you can approach your training in a logical way and in a way kind of backed by data versus kind of falling into the trap of here's the reality. We like to train the things we're good at, right? If we're left to our own devices, we're going to stay on the terrain we like, that we feel comfortable on. We're going to pick the exercises that we feel most successful at. When in reality, having some kind of assessment allows us to gauge, well, what am I bad at? And how can I now focus on that to turn that weakness into a strength?
Do you have any specific tests that you do, or particular metrics that you've found to correlate really well with ice climbing, for example? So I'd imagine one would be like, how long can you hang on a tool?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm working on this winter is trying to develop kind of a standardized assessment to use with athletes because there really isn't one out there. But some of the things that you really want to have a sense of, I think just a tool hang for time with shoulders engaged is, I think, a good number to have, right? How long can we stay on our tools without coming off and losing good form? I think also a weighted tool hang, say like a 10-second weighted tool hang, is really useful. And then in terms of our pulling strength, I'm a big fan of a weighted pull up. The 1 rep max weighted pull up is a good measure of our ability to pull, and we're going to have to pull. And along with that, I think a one arm, depending on your experience and strength, a 2 arm weighted lock off for 10 seconds is useful, and a 1 arm weighted lock off is useful. I think the 1 arm, 10 seconds to me feels like a bit long. I think probably 5 or 7 seconds. This is one where I really want to kind of get some input from other climbers and trainers and coaches and really narrow down to see what the reality of that is. We see a lot with rock climbing now, with a hangboard, recognizing we don't need to do such long hangs, right, to actually strengthen fingers. And I think the reality is holding a 1 arm lock off for most ice climbers isn't a reality. It's, can you support your weight for a short period of time if your feet blow and then re-engage? Hard dry tooling, yeah, you want to be able to lock that off, right? So there's a bit of a variation, right, depending on your objectives and what's going to be the most useful metric.
Once you do the baseline assessment, then you go into, talking about goals and objectives for the season. Maybe you look a little bit further out. So how do you talk with clients, or how do you help people think about their objectives and sort of identifying what is most important to work on?
Yeah, so I think the conversation around goals and objectives, it's nice to be aspirational, right? Thinking big and long term, and then breaking it down. So that might be 5 years from now, what do you want to be doing? Break that down to 1 year from now, or this upcoming season, what do you want to be doing? And then looking at where their numbers are, what their strengths are, what their past experiences are, the types of routes that they've been on, and starting to identify what are benchmarks or stepping stones for them to get to that later goal, right? So if they want to go go climb the real big drip or something in the Canadian Rockies, well, you need to be able to climb water ice 6, not just like straight up water ice 6, but mushroom kind of weird, funky style ice climbing. You need to be comfortable climbing at an M9 level. And you need to be comfortable doing that a few hours in away from your car and away from civilization. And so breaking it down into its component parts and starting to look at what are the different pieces you can work on, not just in terms of physical training, but also identifying shorter term objectives to help build the skill set that will be necessary for that bigger objective.
So once you start evaluating and analyzing the objectives and breaking it down into sort of more incremental steps, presumably 4 to 8 week plus maybe training timelines, and you can sort of extrapolate from there. Where do you start? So you have the baseline assessment, you have sort of what they're working towards. How do you start thinking about what's most important to focus on and then planning your training blocks?
So, I mean, that's where the assessment comes in. It's really looking at what stands out as an area of weakness and whether that is necessary for the objective, right? So, if your goals are ice climbing, right? Strength is always a good thing. Okay. Increasing your strength is never a bad thing. And increasing your overall power endurance is a good thing. The reality of it is, though, for most ice climbing, the application of force in a short time period is not necessarily the most applicable physical element. As you were saying, Aaron, talking about like dry tooling is this mix of bouldering and techie. Well, ice climbing is very rarely do you need to move very quickly to a hold in that way you do when you're bouldering, right? So if your goals are ice specific, it's probably a lot more about strength and endurance and power endurance. If your goals are mixed climbing, then there's going to be a power element in that. And depending on the length of those routes, maybe the power endurance looks different, right? It's more about that anaerobic power versus an aerobic power and an aerobic capacity that comes into effect with ice climbing. So looking at those goals, you can start to think like, well, what are the blocks we need? Okay, well, we need more strength. We don't really need power for these goals, but we do need to work on endurance. And then looking at the training history and the timeline and the time available before you need to apply it, whether it makes sense to train these, sequentially in a linear periodization, or is this going to be a concurrent thing where you're doing a nonlinear plan? And all of those are going to, I mean, that's going to also take into account like people's life factors, the time they have to train, what they have to work around for everything outside of their training. So it's really bringing in a ton of different data points and really customizing it to the athlete's needs.
I am a man of my word that this would be short, so we can open it up to questions. But before we do, Patrick, are there other things that you want to specifically mention before we field questions?
I think that I really want to emphasize the importance of goals and prioritization of your time. I'm sure people I know in the emails we're sending out, one of the questions like balancing ice and rock goals. The reality of it is we have to make decisions on what matters most to us, right? And there are ways to achieve your rock goals and your ice goals depending on what those goals are, right? And so I think that thinking long and hard about what is most important to you is going to be really important in talking about goals and thinking about the way you approach your training. I personally, right now, I'm still out rock climbing, but for the most part, I'm actually not training for rock climbing. I'm essentially sacrificing, the quote unquote sending season in terms of like focusing on projects, um, because I know I'm more inspired by what's coming this winter, and I'll get out and get on hard things for me this rock season, but I recognize I'm not investing in terms of my training, and that might mean I don't send. And that's a trade-off that I'm specifically making, and consciously making. So I think it's really important to think about what your goals are and prioritize them as you think about training for whatever, whether it's for rock or for ice.
So now it is the discussion part. Does anyone have any questions? We can, so this is an opportunity to ask particulars about your own plans or your own training regimen, get feedback. We can take this in a lot of different directions. Who wants to go first? I'm going to say either Brendan or Katie, just because I can see you.
Yeah, I'll throw a question out there. Patrick, I was wondering if you could talk about maybe some specific exercises that would help. How do I word this? Well, big issue for me last season was I could lead pretty steep ice, but only for short pitches, like less than 30 meters. And when it came to like even lower grades, I would get pumped out when it came to like full length 70-meter pitches. Like
Okay.
trying to figure out how to balance that out.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a couple of things that come to mind with this. And before getting into like say specific exercises, what I would say is the number, if we're talking ice, right, in general, the best way to avoid that pumping out on ice is to really make sure we are climbing efficiently and with good form, right? Anything you can do on ice to get your feet level and to get your tool, if not centered, at least within, right, kind of the vertical planes of our feet is going to go a long way in order to allow us to relax and not have to hang on as much. Also, hopefully everybody here is using tools with upper grips, ideally something with an offset handle, right? Learning how to swing and then bump to the upper grip so that we're straightening our arm. We're not spending as much time locked off is huge. And learning to move bigger moves between tools, right? So that we can be more extended and elongated in our upper body. Now, as far as like things you can work on in terms of like the pump, one, grip strength. Okay, so that's where like a weighted hang on tools, I think really comes into play. Right now, what I'm doing is basically a 10-second weighted hang with 50 seconds off for 4 hangs for 4 sets, right? Is something that I'm doing, and I'm doing it at a number that's, so we think about strength, right? And the science behind strength. Max strength, you want to be 85 to 95% of your 1 rep max, right? And so if you dip below that into that 75 to 85%, you're into hypertrophy where you're building muscle, but you're also damaging the muscle. And that if you damage it, you repair it, the muscles get bigger. Your forearm flexor muscles are only going to get so big. Maximizing that max strength time, that max strength work on our forearms will be really helpful. So tool hangs are really helpful. And then, I think something I've done in the past, haven't done lately, but I think especially if you're struggling, you're finding you're getting pumped on lower angle type stuff, but just long pitches, what are called rollies. So if you have like a lacrosse stick or a bar with a string on it and a weight, and you're holding it out and you're rolling it up and then rolling it down. that is much more of a capacity and more strength endurance type exercise. You will feel obliterated from that, right? Important thing about training strength. If we're training max strength, you should come out of that max strength workout and you're like, cool, I feel good. Like your muscles can feel tired later on, but you should not be coming out of all of your training feeling like you got run over by a truck, because that means you've gone so deep that you're prolonging the recovery period. You're not ready to train 2 days later. It's 3, 4 days. You get to the point. Rollies are definitely something that can be that's, you're digging deep on that. You need to use that selectively. But I mean, in terms of strength, if you increase your strength, your endurance will come up with it. And then time on tools, right? If you have access to like a home gym, a steep wall, spending several minutes at a time on tools. I have a little 30-degree wall in my basement. None of the holds are bad. Like I'm not going to blow off any of the holds. There are a few Cooke holds I will blow off of, and I just ignore them for this type of work. But staying on for 3 minutes at a time, 3 minutes on, 1 or 2 minutes off, 3 minutes on, you're going to feel that. And here's the thing: if you're used to being on your tools in 30-degree overhung terrain, all of a sudden vertical terrain doesn't feel like a big deal.
And yeah, thank you so much. That was really helpful.
If not everyone has the option of a home gym, because there's not really dry tooling options in the Northeast, can you do something similar in like an overhanging boulder wall at the chance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that training for rock climbing, especially in steep terrain, can be really useful in terms of working that pump and working their power endurance. So that could be bouldering, that could be rope routes. If the gym will allow, and you can use like the dry ice tools, not the ones with the straps, because like modern gyms aren't set up with that style of hole, but the wooden one that's shaped like a gnomic, or you get the escape climbing picks for your tools and actually get on your tools on terrain is useful. But if all you have is rock climbing in steep terrain will help, right? And also it'll help with movement, body positioning, because when you get into really steep ice and really hard ice, it's no longer that classic like A-frame positioning. You're dropping, you're twisting, twist locking, doing all this other stuff, and having that bag of tricks, right? That movement library will help you with that. But yeah, I think, to your point, Aaron, right? There isn't always a dry tooling option, but rock movement will help for sure, especially if you could get on steeper terrain.
Katie, do you have questions? Sean does have one in the chat, but prioritizing people who are showing their faces.
What you say about prioritization really hits home, because last year I so failed at that. And just kind of did too many winter things. And it was a tough year for conditions in New Hampshire, for sure. So it was really, really hard to get on steeper ice and kind of find people to go out on steeper ice. So, I mean, I have a very kind of basic goal this year. I just want to lead Dracula. And I've led similar, but in condition. And so I want to progress to the point where, whatever condition the ice is in, and mentally and physically. So that's like my very basic goal. And I don't know, I'm just trying to kind of get there. So so this has been really helpful.
And I think it's good you have a measurable goal, right? You have a clear objective. And so I think for you, it's going to be a matter of looking at, well, what am I comfortable leading? What are other routes that are presenting themselves that can get me to that point, right? And starting to identify, like, okay, if I want to lead Dracula, right, what are the other routes that are maybe not as hard, but have similar elements, similar longish stretches of steep, maybe some bulges, right? Things I can do laps on in order to dial in my efficiency, right? The thing about leading Dracula, is it's wide, you can get stems, right? Versus
Oh
if
yeah,
you're
on that left side.
right, where it's like you're on a rounded column, well, that's going to be different. Like leading Dracula is not necessarily going to be the same, isn't going to set you up to lead drop line in most normal conditions, right? So I'm starting to identify what are similar features that are maybe a step down that you can work towards.
Okay, that's cool. Thanks.
Jess, do you have a question?
I would say like the biggest challenge, just not having, besides like getting on ice and mixed climbs and not having as much of a like rock climbing background, which I'm dabbling in now, but it's still very new and much scarier and harder seeming. But like for me, I think the biggest challenge I'm facing, which is just, I think I've figured out as I've attempted to progress in skiing or climbing, is some hip mobility challenges. And just wondering, everyone, like there's lots that can be done there. And I've definitely been working with people on it and I'm seeing progress. But going to JJ's and like knowing I wasn't going to make more than like 3 holds on his type of comp, like because so much of it was starting overhung. And I was just like, okay, I'm like, for a while, I was like, I don't understand, not having a climbing background, like how people reach things, right? I like didn't get it. They'd be like, oh, you can do it. And I was like, no, my hips like don't do that. I don't understand. And people would tell me like, no, they should move. And then I went to someone and she's like, oh, they do not move. They're stuck. And I was like, okay, like, thank you. This is, and then there's the, okay, well, how do we still go do the thing?
Right.
And build that progression. And so I've done a lot of mobility work, which has been really cool and interesting. That could be a topic for another time. But curious kind of your thoughts, where I see people and I'm like, God, they make it look so easy to like move their hips, and curious kind of where, if you have any feedback to like, I'm starting out with like pretty immobile hip game, but I need that game to be dialed for me to progress in skiing too and anything else. So
yeah. I think for you, I think that not having that like rock climbing background, that is something that can be an easy investment in terms of trying to find, because JJ's gym is going to just be an ass kicker no matter what. For those who don't know, JJ is like a World Cup quality competitor. In terms of dry tooling.
Well, and even Tom's, right? Even Tom's, which is like way more chill, and I can at least make it off of like at least a route or two to complete over time. But same thing with Tom. Tom's like, oh yeah, just do this like nice little hip block thing. And I'm like, it sounds really nice.
I think some investment in just, if you have access to a local rock climbing gym with some decent instructors, right?
Okay.
Getting involved in some kind of, whether it's through private lessons or like we have like, I know like Sean here, like started out with our like climbing essentials class and is now in our adult team.
Yeah.
Right? Getting time where a coach can really get eyes on and really work on you with how to move on the wall and get out of, say, like more that kind of square classic movement pattern.
Right. I can muscle up things. I know I'm supposed to use my feet more. I know I'm supposed to trust my feet more, all the hard things that are just hard right now. But like, I do at least, like, there is like down the street is just at least something to get on in terms of a big pinnacle with options. And I have been at least rock climbing. Like I'm going to Washington Pass for the weekend and gunning one-on-one, and I've never been there and I'm really excited. But sometimes you get a guide, which is great. And I know this one, and they just want to like get you there safely and like do something cool and stand on top of something cool. But I think like, having like, I want the person to be like, yo, let's try this way of movement to actually tell me what to do, versus people who are sensitive to telling you, you know what I mean? Like,
and that's an important distinction. And I think you can work either like through a gym or with a guide. And it's going to be a matter of, you're going to have to put aside the like objective, right?
Yeah.
Going to Washington Pass is awesome, but it's really objective based climbing. It's like getting
Right.
up the towers, right?
Yeah.
And just like, no, I want to do a cracking day where I work entirely on my movement skills, especially the idea of like turning hips and engaging and walking
Okay.
off, and like really just being upfront with whoever you're working with on what you want to get out of it. I think
Okay.
will go the longest in doing that for you, and
Okay.
getting you there so that you can really, really start to understand what are the body mechanics that are involved with that. Watch other people climb as much as possible too, and seeing how they do moves that you struggle with and really breaking it down, taking video of yourselves moving and looking at that with your climbing partners, friends, coach, instructor, whomever, is a really powerful tool in order to do that as well.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Are you more focused on ice or dry tooling this upcoming season? Because the body positionings will be
Your
different.
prioritization spiel was like really hit home. I'm like, I even was working with like a stand-up paddleboard professional this summer, and I was like, oh my God, it was way too much to like focus on mountains and paddling. Like it was like, this is stupid. Like, this is why people pick something. So I'm really struggling with that prioritization piece, like straight up. I want to get better at skiing. I'm in that like intermediate to advanced progression. So there's like so much room up there. And I did get 14 days on the ice last season. It was like, I felt like my first real ice season, which was amazing. And it was great because people that were taking me out, like were, Christian, who you met probably like this week. And so, now it's just like, okay, do I pick ice again or do I focus on skiing? And it's hard. They're all fun.
Yeah, exactly. It is hard. I joke that, people are like, oh, do you ski? And it's like, well, I know how to ski, but like skiing's my fourth winter sport, with the first three being ice climbing, and ice climbing.
Right.
And that's kind of the reality.
Yeah. I'm doing a Denali prep course in February just to like have a fun sufferfest and like learn new things. And that will, I know, push me to like pick up the fitness, which I'm starting a program this week on anyways through a gal through Uphill.
Nice.
Athlete. But ice is definitely the preferred. It was really cool to see the progression in one first real season. And to all of a sudden start climbing things, right? I'm like, I spent a lot of time in URA and I was like, okay, am I doing it wrong? I'm not getting pumped. Like it took a second to realize, oh no, like we're just dialing in that efficiency.
Yeah.
And my biggest other challenge that, again, topic for whatever is like, and it's just time on tools, I think, is this like not overthinking game, like just climbing game. And especially dry tooling. In indoor. Outdoor, I feel a little like it's just slow. I'm slow, which is fine to be like really articulate, but for the belayer, it's a little slow.
Yeah. And, as we're kind of working through this, just so you all know, like for the 6 of you who are here on this call, like I'm going to provide like a free half-hour consultation to each of you individually, so we can really kind of get into the weeds, for each of you, who've, taken the time to invest by being here and making this happen. So, don't feel like, if you're like, oh, I've got so many things, so that you'll have an opportunity where we could kind of get into some of that as well. So because that's all, there's so much to unpack, right? In a small amount of time.
Yeah.
John has a question from the comments, the chat, but you might need some clarification, Sean. So I'll just ask you a question, but feel free to jump in. He says, for large movements between tool placements, is that more tricep dependent than pulling? What are recommended ways to train this effectively?
So yes, it's not so much pulling when we're talking about ice climbing, right? It's not so much pulling. There is an element of like tricep work. And I think building in some tricep work can be really helpful. And that can be, done so many different ways. It can be through dips, kind of the classic tricep extensions, like overhead. It can be out of the bench with a tricep extension. If you want something more sport specific in terms of swinging, what I've done is with those home dumbbell kits where you screw on the weights on both ends. Just do it on one end. So you've kind of got like a medieval mace or scepter and basically, right? So you're getting the tricep and a little bit of that wrist flick is a very sport specific way to do that. In terms of moving up on your tools, the reality of it is there's an element of pulling in there, but really it's in our legs and being willing to move our feet higher and being able to hold a lock off more so than actively pulling ourselves up, right? So that's where that working on a 90-degree lock off, the ability to kind of isometrically hold, I think is really powerful and really useful. And really, as I said, with time on tools and efficiencies, if you have access to some kind of home wall or gym, I'm working with an athlete right now, and part of her assessment, she has a home wall. So it's all right, we're using door hinges as just cheap dry tooling holds. It's 2 door hinges right in the middle of her wall, 2 feet that she can stand on at the base, then 2 door hinges up at the top. So she's kind of scrunched into this locked off position and then extending up, coming back down and just laddering in that. So you're used to moving long, pushing out of your legs, but also having to keep that tool kind of locked in and your body into the wall is a way that you can really kind of work on those movement mechanics. And you can do that on any steepness of wall, but I think doing it on something steeper than what you're going to climb is going to yield better results overall.
Certainly, ice climbing is not just about the physical, as the title of this event suggests. Do you want to talk about? So one of the questions that we received was about mind tricks or mental preparation, things that you can apply to harder leads, let's say, or any leads really.
Yeah, and so this is where I'll kind of touch on some stuff, but I think for all of you, if you have specific questions in that, where that our one-on-one call I think would be really good. But in terms of mental tricks, one thing that a tool we use a lot with Project Direct is a drill called Notice When. And Notice When is literally when you're climbing, make note of when you lose focus of the move ahead of you, right? When your mind is drifting away to, am I going to send? Am I topping this out? What did I have for lunch? What did my boss say to me earlier today? What do I need to do between my gym session and getting home? Or, all those things. And making note of when we have these attention leaks. It's like meditation. We are going to have attention leaks. But the next step then is, I've lost focus. Can I bring it back? And practicing bringing back our focus to the move at hand. Now, in ice climbing or trad climbing, whatever, any form of climbing, this also can include worrying about the gear below us, right? And, whether it's run out, whether it's questionable, that's an attention leak as well. So I think Notice When is a powerful tool that you can try to work on just to bring your focus back to what you have to do in that moment, because there's nothing you can do about all those other things. You can't, you have to either move up or move down, right? If you're worried about the gear below you, you either need to move up to a point where you can get better gear or to the top or whatever, or you need to move down and reassess that gear or reset that gear, do something to deal with that. I think a powerful tool as well is to be conscious of our breathing habits, right? When we get worried, when we get panicked, we start hyperventilating and using your breath, right? Focusing on slowing that breathing down giving you something to focus on as you're like standing there, like, I don't know if I want to move. Well, start by getting your breath under control and bringing your heart rate down. I think is something that's often overlooked, and often I'm seeing people are just they're panicked and they're just like moving upwards. It's like, no, stop, and reassess. And then I think also, Kelsey, you had in your email kind of had a question about like mantras and use of them. Like a mantra or a saying can be a really powerful tool to help you refocus, when you are losing that focus, to bring your thoughts back to your breath. For me, and here's the thing, you need to find something that's meaningful for you. Yeah, I can't just give you like, say these words. It's not, it's not magic, it's like, boom, okay, good. But for me, when I'm getting scared, especially on ice, my mantra is like, find your feet, Pat, just find your feet, right? Because that's a cue. It's a mental cue for me that everything comes out of our form and our efficiencies and our technique. And if I can find my feet and get my weight onto my feet, I know I have the physical strength to at least like back and forth, hang on, get something back, either figure out gear, decide to move upward, or decide to move down. Right. And so I think that it's important for us to really think of our mental training as training, and to be in tune with our bodies and with kind of our own psychology, and what's going on in our own heads, right? And we can't just discount like, oh, that's an irrational fear. Well, it doesn't matter if it's a rational or irrational fear if it's producing a biological fear response, right? We need to find tools in order to work through those. Part of this comes with experience, right? But part of this also comes with approaching these situations with a training mindset of that there are things that we can affect them. We can impose our will on these circumstances, and recognizing that that is something you can work on in your preparation, but also while you're on the wall. Kelsey, go ahead.
That was really helpful. Yeah, I know there's no like, staple mantra or anything but I'm just curious because, you're so sendy and like have gone through that process of like, looking up at something and being scared and like it's the next step up from what you are used to leading, and like how you pump yourself up for that. And yeah,
And
I
I
like the
think-
find one.
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind though as well is like, yeah, for every like really badass cool thing I've done, I probably walked away from it 3 times.
Mhm.
I'd like walked away from Omega several times before I finally did it. I'd walked away from Valhalla several times before I did it. And I think it's important to have a good understanding of who you are, what strengths you can bring, what what skills you can bring to what is presented ahead of you, and to try and break things down objectively. Right? What are your concerns with the start of this route? So the first ascent I did this past winter, Survivor of Hassan at Snake Mountain, the start of it was columned, detached, super thin. There's not a good landing zone if things go wrong. You're falling onto a boulder. And I had to kind of keep that all in mind. And for me, it was, okay, well, I'm going to give this a try, but knowing that I can back down and like pull on. And it's like, okay, as soon as I pull on, I'm like, I can down climb this. Right.
Mhm.
And moving up and keeping in mind what are my options, and trying to avoid getting yourself into a situation where you're thinking there are no options.
Mhm.
And really evaluating and assessing it as you go. And I take a pretty conservative approach with that. And it gets me up things, but also maybe I walk away from things that are doable, that maybe if I was a little bit bolder or a little bit more willing to risk things, that I would send, or other people might come the next day and do, or later that day and do. And being okay, this is something I see in the ice climbing community as a whole, is own who you are and be proud of who you are and the decisions that you're making. Because you're making decisions based off a set of values and a set of experiences that nobody else has or can judge, right? And if you're willing to work within that and own that and be like, cool, someone's more badass than me, or someone's bolder than me, or whatever, that's great. And you get to, I mean, everybody gets to define those parameters for themselves. And if other people are the ones pressuring you to define those parameters without an understanding of who you are, right? Like, you should not be listening to them. Listen to people who understand you, know you, who might push you outside your comfort zone, but are also going to give you the tools to be able to manage that, and manage that in a way that you walk away from it like, that was amazing. I learned so much about myself, and not, that was horrible. I'm never doing that again.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Just looking at the time, because we did schedule it for an hour. If people have to leave, have at it. Maybe if there's another question or two, maybe Pat, you have time to answer.
I've got a few more minutes, so I'd be happy to answer, one or two more. And then, like I said, and then I'll connect with Aaron to get all of your email addresses so that we can connect in a one-on-one setting as well.
That's
Jackie,
awesome. I have to run, but thank you so much.
thanks for coming, Katie.
I definitely value what you were saying about having an individualized plan for training, but and man, I've been really struggling with that, just with the rock climbing side of things this year, trying to find information that is accurate, not outdated, and like actually works with somebody that has a job and can't work out 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations of resources like websites or books or training plans that are reasonable?
Yeah. So, I feel like there's so much in terms of rock climbing. Like there's a ton out there, right? And what I would say is, if you find a plan, right, if you're working from some kind of stock plan, vet it. Feel free to vet it through others, right? Whether that's something we do with Project Direct, or these power hour calls where basically you could book with me or Carly or someone else with a training plan and be like, can you help me with this? And so that can be an economical way, because working with a coach one-on-one is it is a financial investment, right? And we recognize that. And maybe it just isn't where you're at or somebody is at. But in terms of, I think if you take a plan, I think some really good resources in terms of taking that and understanding it. There's good stuff in the Uphill Athlete forums, and in the original Training for the New Alpinism book. There's some good stuff in there. I think Tyler Nelson, and the stuff he's doing in terms of finger training, he's at Camp 4 Human Performance, C4HP. I think he is doing the best stuff in understanding finger strength and adaptations there, because I think he's gonna, the information that he's publicizing that others are doing, right, and in terms of a more scientific field, is going to turn especially hangboard training on its head. I think the science behind hangboard training is at an inflection point where we're realizing what we were doing, it worked, but doesn't necessarily work the way we think it works, or doesn't really work well. So I would definitely go a deep dive on that in terms of finger training. The other stuff, basic strength training is basic strength training, right? If you want to train max strength, you need to be operating close to your 1 rep max. If you want to build muscle, you're coming down a little bit. If you're trying to build, like, those percentages are all throughout the scientific literature, and no real reputable coaches are, you know, are going to be working outside of those realms. And so I think, take the finger stuff with a grain of salt. And I would definitely look into what Tyler Nelson has been doing in terms of podcasts and Instagram and articles, YouTube. There's a lot of great stuff there. And that's a great way to do it. Aaron Mulkey has some good stuff on ice specific training in his podcast and on his Instagram. And so, I think that it's just a matter of, figuring out what resources are there and then talking through it with knowledgeable individuals and asking yourself, why are they doing this? I think is an important question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other
Anything
last questions?
All right. Well, thank you, Patrick, for joining us today. And thanks to everyone else for attending and for asking your questions.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.
Happy
for coming
climbing,
on.
everyone.